When the truth came out, nobody was prepared for what the FBI found. The FBI agent's hands were shaking as he closed the folder. Special Agent Marcus Reynolds had spent 15 years investigating white-collar crime, had seen corruption that would make your stomach turn, but nothing had prepared him for this. He looked across the table at Ethan Cole and Maria Thompson, his face pale, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Cole, Miss Thompson, what you've uncovered here isn't just embezzlement. It's something far worse. And I need you both to understand that once I make this call, once this investigation goes active, there's no going back. Your lives will never be the same." Maria felt the blood drain from her face. They'd spent 3 days compiling evidence for the FBI, documenting every suspicious transaction, every fraudulent invoice, every stolen dollar. $4.3 million taken from sick children. That was already devastating. What could possibly be worse than that? Ethan reached for her hand under the table, squeezing it tight, and Maria realized he was as terrified as she was. Agent Reynolds opened his laptop and turned it toward them. On the screen was a photograph that made Maria's breath stop. It was Thomas Brighton, Ethan's best friend, the man who'd cried at Sarah's funeral. But he wasn't alone in the photo. He was shaking hands with Ethan's ex-wife, Jennifer Cole. And behind them stood a woman Maria had never seen before, but whose eyes held a coldness that sent chills down her spine. "Mr. Cole," Agent Reynolds said slowly, carefully, like he was defusing a bomb. "When was the last time you spoke to your ex-wife?" Ethan's confusion was written all over his face. "Jennifer? Maybe 6 months ago. She called on what would have been Sarah's 19th birthday. What does she have to do with this?" The silence that followed was deafening. Agent Reynolds took a deep breath. "Everything, Mr. Cole. She has everything to do with this." Maria watched the confusion, then realization on Ethan's face. His hand went slack in hers. His breathing became shallow, rapid, like someone had punched all the air from his lungs. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not possible. Jennifer loved Sarah as much as I did. She couldn't." "Mr. Cole," Agent Reynolds interrupted gently, "your ex-wife has been Thomas Brighton's silent partner in this operation since day one. In fact, according to the financial records Ms. Thompson uncovered, the entire scheme was her idea." Maria felt like she'd been dropped into ice water. She looked at Ethan and saw her man breaking in real time. Not just disappointment or anger, but the complete destruction of everything he thought he knew about his life. "Why?" Ethan's voice cracked. "We divorced because she couldn't handle the grief. She moved to California to get away from everything that reminded her of Sarah. She wanted nothing to do with the foundation. She said it was too painful." Before we dive into what the FBI discovered, let us know in the comments if you watched part 1 of this story. And if you're just joining us now, make sure you hit that subscribe button because what happens next will shatter everything you thought you knew. Agent Reynolds pulled up another document. Bank statements showing regular transfers to an account in Jennifer Cole's name. The foundation wasn't about grief for her, Mr. Cole. It was opportunity. And Thomas Brighton wasn't your friend. He was her boyfriend. Had been for 3 years before Sarah even got sick. The room started spinning. Maria gripped Ethan's hand tighter as she watched this revelation destroy him. 3 years. Ethan repeated. Sarah was alive for 3 years while Jennifer was. He couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't process the magnitude of the betrayal. While I was spending every waking moment trying to save our daughter, my wife was sleeping with my best friend. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cole," Reynolds said, and he genuinely sounded sorry. "But it gets worse. The woman in that photo? That's Sarah's primary care nurse from the hospital. Rebecca Martinez. She was on Brighton and your ex-wife's payroll. And according to Linda Hartley's testimony, she was feeding them inside information about families in crisis. Families who were desperate enough to trust anything presented as help. What started as financial fraud had just become the most personal betrayal imaginable. And as Maria sat there watching Ethan's world collapse, she had no idea that the FBI was about to reveal something even more devastating. Something that would make them question everything they thought they knew about Sarah's death. Agent Reynolds gave them exactly 60 seconds to process before he said the words that shattered him completely. "Mr. Cole, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. When Sarah was in the hospital waiting for a kidney transplant, do you remember who was managing the donor list coordination?" Ethan looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and devastated. Thomas. Thomas was on the hospital board. He said he'd make sure Sarah was prioritized if a compatible donor became available. He promised me he'd... His voice broke completely. Oh God, no. Maria's hands were shaking as she realized what Agent Reynolds was implying. Are you saying Thomas Brighton sabotaged Sarah's placement on the donor list? We're saying it's under investigation, Reynolds said carefully. We found emails between Brighton, your ex-wife, and Rebecca Martinez discussing how a prolonged illness would generate more sympathy and donations for the foundation. We found messages about how Sarah's death would be the ultimate catalyst for fundraising. And we found a deleted email from Rebecca Martinez to Jennifer Cole, sent 2 days before Sarah died, that said, "It's done. The donor was redirected. I'm sorry, but she said it was necessary." The sound that came out of Ethan Cole was barely human. It was grief and rage and horror compressed into a single agonizing wail. He stood up so fast his chair crashed backward, stumbling to the corner of the room, and Maria watched this man, this strong, brilliant, powerful man, collapse against the wall and slide down it, sobbing so hard his whole body convulsed. Maria was at his side instantly, pulling him into her arms, her own tears flowing as she tried to hold together a man who was shattering into a million pieces. No, they went too far. My baby girl. They took her from me, from this world. Ethan sobbed into Maria's shoulder. My daughter could have lived, and they did this to her so they could use her death to steal money. Jennifer, the woman I loved, the mother of my child, she did this to our daughter for money? Thomas, the man I called my brother, he went this far for money? Maria held him tighter, her heart breaking for this man who'd already lost everything and was now discovering he'd lost even more than he knew. We don't know that for certain, she whispered, even though the evidence seemed damning. We don't know that's what happened. Yes, we do, Ethan said, pulling back to look at her with eyes that had died. I know it in my soul, Maria. I always wondered why that donor match fell through at the last minute. They told me the kidney went to another patient whose need was more urgent. But Sarah was dying. How could anyone's need be more urgent? And I believed them because Thomas was my friend and Jennifer was my wife and Sarah's nurse seemed so caring and competent. I believed them when I could have saved my little girl. Agent Reynolds let them sit there for 5 long minutes before speaking again. Mr. Cole, I can't promise you that we'll be able to prove the donor list manipulation in court. Medical records from that time might have been destroyed. Rebecca Martinez fled to Mexico the day after we arrested Brighton. And your ex-wife has lawyered up with one of the most expensive defense attorneys in the country. But I can promise you this, we're going to prosecute them for every single crime we can prove. He pulled up another file, and Maria forced herself to look even though she wanted to close her eyes and make all of this disappear. The scheme worked like this. Thomas Brighton and Jennifer Cole identified your foundation as the perfect vehicle for fraud. High profile. Emotionally compelling origin story. A grieving father who'd be too focused on honoring his daughter to notice discrepancies. They waited exactly 18 months after Sarah's death to begin, long enough for you to be less vigilant, but soon enough that the emotional resonance was still strong. They created an entire ecosystem of fake vendors, shell companies, and corrupt officials. But they were smart about it. They didn't just steal. They also helped people. Real families got real assistance. Real children received real medical care. That's what made the fraud so hard to detect. For every dollar they stole, they spent another dollar legitimately. The foundation actually did help thousands of families. That made you trust the operation. Made you believe everything was working as intended. Maria listened in horror as Reynolds laid out the full scope of the conspiracy. But here's where it gets truly diabolical. Jennifer Cole didn't just want your money, Mr. Cole. She wanted revenge. According to emails we recovered, she blamed you for Sarah's death. Said you'd pushed too hard for experimental treatments, that you'd made Sarah's final months about your ego instead of her comfort. She convinced herself that stealing from the foundation wasn't theft, it was justice. Taking back what you'd stolen from her by making Sarah's death about yourself instead of about Sarah. Ethan's laugh was bitter and broken. She blamed me? She sabotaged our daughter's transplant and then blamed me for Sarah dying? People justify terrible things when they want to, Reynolds said quietly. Your ex-wife convinced herself that she was the real victim. That Sarah needed peace from the drug trials. In her mind, she was just taking what was owed to her. Maria felt rage building in her chest, hot and righteous and overwhelming. Where is she? Where's Jennifer Cole right now? Her attorney's office in Los Angeles, Reynolds said. Possibly claiming she had no knowledge of the fraud, that she was just a consultant who provided advice about foundation operations in exchange for a small fee. Her lawyer's already preparing a defense that paints her as another victim of Thomas Brighton's manipulation. Small fee. Maria's voice was shaking with fury. You just showed us transfers totaling millions of dollars. Oh, it's worse than that, Reynolds said, pulling up more documents. Jennifer Cole has been living in a $10 million mansion in Malibu, driving a Bentley, taking monthly trips to Europe, all funded by money stolen from sick children. All while maintaining this public persona of a grieving mother who lost her daughter and her marriage. She even gave interviews to parenting magazines about coping with loss. Made herself into this sympathetic figure while she was actively stealing from the foundation built in Sarah's name. Ethan stood up slowly, wiping his eyes, and Maria watched something shift in his expression. The grief was still there, but now it was hardening into something else. Something cold and determined and absolutely terrifying. Get her back to Texas, he said, his voice deadly calm. I don't care what you have to do, what legal mechanisms you have to use, what favors you have to call in. Bring Jennifer Cole back to Texas to face trial. Because I'm going to make sure she spends the rest of her life in prison. Not for stealing money. For all she did to my daughter. Mr. Cole, we may not be able to prove, Reynolds started, but Ethan cut him off. Then we'll prove what we can. But that woman is not going to hide behind expensive lawyers and claim she's a victim. She's not going to rewrite history and make herself the hero of a tragedy she orchestrated. She's going to face Sarah's memory and what she did to it. And if it takes every dollar I have left, every connection I've built, every ounce of influence I can muster, I will make sure Jennifer Cole faces justice. Maria had never loved him more than she did in that moment. Broken, devastated, barely holding himself together, but still fighting. Still believing that justice mattered even when everything else had been stripped away. She stood beside him, taking his hand again. We'll do it together, she said firmly. You're not alone in this, Ethan. Not anymore. Agent Reynolds looked between them and nodded slowly. All right. Then let's build a case so airtight that no lawyer in the world can break it. But I need you both to understand something. This is going to get worse before it gets better. When we arrest Jennifer Cole and the rest of the conspirators, when this story goes public, the media is going to tear you apart. They're going to ask why you didn't notice. They're going to question every decision you made. They're going to turn Sarah's death into tabloid fodder all over again. Are you prepared for that? Ethan's jaw clenched. Sarah's memory has already been desecrated by the people who were supposed to love her most. The media can't do worse than what's already been done. So yes, Agent Reynolds, we're prepared. Bring them all down. The FBI coordinated the arrests for maximum impact, but nothing could have prepared Maria and Ethan for the media firestorm that followed. When federal agents arrested Jennifer Cole at a charity gala in Beverly Hills, ironically an event for children's cancer research, the footage went viral within hours. Jennifer in her $10,000 evening gown, diamond earrings sparkling under the lights, being led away in handcuffs while Hollywood elites watched in shock. The optics were devastating. And the story was even worse. Within 24 hours, every major news outlet was running with some version of the headline. Billionaire's ex-wife arrested in multi-million-dollar charity fraud. Did she let their daughter die? The speculation was immediate and vicious. Cable news panels debated whether Ethan had known about the fraud, whether he'd been complicit, whether his grief had been genuine or just another part of the scam. Maria watched in horror as talking heads who'd never met Ethan tore apart his character on national television. But it was the tabloids that went truly dark. Billionaire sacrificed daughter for sympathy donations? Screamed one headline. Sarah Cole, the girl who died twice, once from disease, once from her parents' greed, read another. They printed old photos of Sarah in the hospital, of Ethan and Jennifer at her bedside, of the family before tragedy tore them apart. They interviewed former hospital staff who remembered the Coles, painting Jennifer as a devoted mother and suggesting that maybe Ethan had been the problem all along. Maria found Ethan 3 days after Jennifer's arrest, sitting in his darkened office, scrolling through news articles with dead eyes. Stop reading that garbage, she said gently, taking the laptop away from him. Those people don't know you. They don't know the truth. Don't they? Ethan's voice was hollow. They're asking the right questions, Maria. How did I not notice? How did I spend 7 years running a foundation without realizing my ex-wife and best friend were robbing it? How did I not know that the woman I'd loved since college, the mother of my child, was capable of letting Sarah die for money? What does it say about me that I was blind to all of it? Maria knelt in front of him, forcing him to look at her. It says you're human, Ethan. It says you trusted people you had every reason to trust. It says you were grieving and trying to honor your daughter and doing the best you could with the information you had. You're not responsible for other people's evil. You're not responsible for Jennifer's choices or Thomas's betrayal or any of it. But I am responsible for not protecting Sarah's legacy, Ethan said, his voice breaking. I built that foundation to honor her memory, and I let it become a tool for the people who murdered her. How do I live with that, Maria? How do I wake up every morning knowing I failed her twice? Once when I couldn't save her life, and again when I couldn't protect her memory. Before Maria could answer, Ethan's phone rang. It was his attorney. The expression on Ethan's face as he listened made Maria's blood run cold. What? Ethan said. That's not possible. The evidence is overwhelming. How can they? He listened for another minute, his face going from pale to gray. I understand. Thank you for calling. He ended the call and sat in silence for a long moment. What happened? Maria asked, dreading the answer. Jennifer's lawyers are arguing that she's the real victim, Ethan said slowly, like he couldn't quite believe the words coming out of his mouth. They're claiming that Thomas Brighton manipulated her, that she was suffering from complicated grief after Sarah's death, that she wasn't in her right mind when she participated in the fraud. And they're arguing that even if she did help steal the money, there's no evidence she had anything to do with Sarah's donor match being redirected. Rebecca Martinez fled to Mexico and won't testify. The hospital destroyed the old records during a system upgrade. It's her word against circumstantial evidence. Maria felt her heart sink. So she might not face charges for Sarah's death? She might not even face serious time for the fraud, Ethan said bitterly. Her lawyer is already negotiating a plea deal. 5 years in a minimum security facility in exchange for testifying against Thomas Brighton. 5 years, Maria. She helped Thomas and she might serve 5 years while Thomas takes the fall for everything. The injustice of it hit Maria like a physical blow. That's not right. That's not justice. Justice? Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. There's no justice for what happened to Sarah. There never was. She died at 12 years old because the people who were supposed to love her most decided money was more important than her life. And now one of those people is going to serve less time than some people get for drug possession. That's not justice. That's just the way the world works when you have enough money for the right lawyers. Maria saw something dying in Ethan's eyes that terrified her. The hope that had sustained him through the investigation, the belief that exposing the truth would matter, it was flickering out. And she didn't know how to reignite it. Ruth Thompson showed up at Ethan's office that evening with a Tupperware container of her famous fried chicken, took one look at her daughter and Ethan, and immediately started praying. Not the quiet, gentle prayers Maria was used to. Loud, fervent, hand-waving prayers that filled the office with a presence that felt almost physical. Lord, we are hurting down here. Ruth called out, her voice strong and sure. We are watching evil people prosper while good people suffer, and we're asking you where you are in all this mess. We're asking why you let a baby girl die. We're asking why you let wicked people steal in her name. We're asking why justice feels like a joke and faith feels like foolishness. She paused, breathing hard, tears streaming down her face. But even in our asking, Lord, we choose to believe. We choose to trust that you see what we cannot see. That you're working in ways we don't understand. That somehow, some way you're going to bring good from this evil. Not because we deserve it. Not because we've earned it. But because that's who you are. The God who brings beauty from ashes. The God who raises dead things to life. The God who doesn't let evil have the final word. By the time Ruth finished, all three of them were crying. And somehow in that moment something shifted. The grief was still there. The anger was still there. But underneath it, something stubborn and resilient and refusing to die was born. Hope. Not the naive kind that believes everything will work out perfectly. But the hard kind. The kind that chooses to keep fighting even when the odds are impossible. I'm not giving up, Ethan said finally, his voice rough but determined. I don't care if Jennifer only serves 5 years. I don't care if we can't prove in court what she did to Sarah. I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth. I'm going to spend every interview, every public statement, every opportunity one of making sure Sarah's real story is told. Not the tabloid version. Not the version her mother's lawyers are spinning. The truth. And I'm going to help you, Maria said firmly. We're in this together. Ruth smiled through her tears. That's my baby girl. That's the daughter I raised. Now both of you eat something before you pass out. Can't change the world on an empty stomach. Drop a comment right now if you're still watching. Tell us what you would do if you discovered someone you loved had betrayed you this deeply. The trial of Thomas Brighton became the most watched court proceeding in Houston history. Every seat in the courtroom was filled. News trucks lined the streets outside. Court TV carried it live with expert commentary. The prosecution had built a case so comprehensive, so detailed, so devastating that even Brighton's expensive lawyers couldn't find cracks in it. Linda Hartley testified for 6 days, walking the jury through every aspect of the fraud. How they'd identified vulnerable families. How they'd created fake vendors and shell companies. How they'd stolen over $4 million while maintaining the appearance of legitimate charitable work. But it was the victim impact statements that brought the courtroom to tears. 23 families stood up and told their stories. Stories of trusting the Sarah Cole Foundation because of Ethan's reputation. Stories of being told their child's treatment was covered when actually the money had been stolen. Stories of scrambling to pay medical bills they thought were handled. Stories of feeling betrayed not just by criminals, but by the system that was supposed to protect them. One mother, Tamara Johnson, told the story of her son Joshua, who had leukemia at age 8. The Sarah Cole Foundation approved funding for Joshua's treatment, she said, her voice shaking. We were so grateful. We thought our prayers had been answered. But then the hospital called saying there was a problem with the payment. We had to delay Joshua's chemotherapy for 2 weeks while they sorted it out. 2 weeks that gave his cancer time to spread. Joshua died 6 months later. Would he have survived if the treatment hadn't been delayed? We'll never know. But we do know that Thomas Brighton stole the money that was supposed to save my baby's life and used it to buy his wife a Mercedes. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of people crying. Maria watched Thomas Brighton sitting at the defense table, his face impassive, showing no emotion, no remorse, no shame. Just the cold calculation of a man who'd been caught and was trying to minimize his punishment. When it was Maria's turn to testify, she walked to the stand wearing the simple blue dress her mother had made and carrying the silver cross Ethan had given her, Sarah's cross. The prosecutor asked her to explain how she discovered the fraud. Maria spoke clearly, her voice steady even as tears rolled down her cheeks. I'm a 23-year-old woman who used to clean houses for $9 an hour, she began. I didn't go to college. I had no experience in finance or accounting. But Mr. Cole gave me a chance because he believed that integrity mattered more than credentials. And when I started looking at the foundation's transactions, things didn't add up. A vendor with no business license. Equipment purchased at 3 times market value. Donation receipts that didn't match bank deposits. Each thing alone could have been a mistake. Together they were a pattern. She paused, looking directly at Thomas Brighton. I almost didn't say anything. I was terrified I was wrong. That I'd lose my job and look like a fool. But then I thought about Sarah Cole. A 12-year-old girl who died and asked her father to help people who couldn't help themselves when she needed help herself. And I realized that staying silent would mean I was helping Thomas Brighton desecrate her memory. So I spoke up. Because some things are more important than keeping your job or protecting yourself. Some things are worth risking everything for. And Sarah's legacy was one of them. The defense attorney tried to rattle her during cross-examination, suggesting she'd been motivated by a desire to get close to Ethan's wealth, that she'd fabricated evidence to make herself look like a hero. Maria met every question with calm honesty. I fell in love with Ethan Cole after I exposed the fraud, not before, she said simply. And if I'd wanted his money, I would have kept quiet about the embezzlement and let the gravy train continue. But I didn't want money. I wanted truth. I wanted justice. I wanted Sarah Cole's memory to be honored the way she deserved. When Maria stepped down, the courtroom erupted in applause until the judge gavelled for order. Ethan was called to testify on day 19. He walked to the stand looking like he'd aged a decade in 6 months. The prosecution asked him to describe his relationship with Thomas Brighton. Ethan's voice was quiet but clear. Thomas was my best friend for 20 years. He was best man at my wedding. He was Sarah's godfather. He brought her presents in the hospital. Made her laugh when she was too sick to smile. When my marriage fell apart after Sarah died, Thomas was there. When I couldn't see a reason to keep going, Thomas told me to get invested in the foundation, to honor Sarah's memory by helping other children. I trusted him with everything. With my business. With my grief. With my daughter's legacy. And he betrayed all of it. The prosecutor paused before asking the next question, giving the jury time to absorb Ethan's pain. Mr. Cole, did you have any knowledge of the fraud being perpetrated through your foundation? None, Ethan said firmly. I trusted the people I'd put in charge. I reviewed quarterly reports, but I didn't examine individual transactions. That was my failure. I should have been more vigilant. I should have protected Sarah's legacy better. And I'll live with that failure for the rest of my life. Then came the question everyone had been waiting for. Mr. Cole, the defense has suggested that you benefited financially from the foundation's operations. Can you address that? Ethan looked directly at the jury. I never took a salary from the Sarah Cole Foundation. never received any compensation. In fact, I personally donated over $15 million to the foundation in the 7 years it operated. The families who trusted my foundation are the victims. The children who didn't receive care because money was stolen are the victims. Sarah, whose memory was desecrated by people who claimed to love her, is the victim. I'm just the fool who didn't see it happening. When Thomas Brighton's defense attorney cross-examined Ethan, he made a critical mistake. He asked about Jennifer Cole. "Mr. Cole, isn't it true that you and your ex-wife had contentious divorce proceedings? That she felt you'd abandoned her during Sarah's illness?" Ethan's eyes went cold. "My ex-wife was sleeping with my best friend while Sarah was dying. She participated in a scheme to steal from the foundation built in our daughter's name. And according to evidence the FBI has recovered, she may have been involved in sabotaging Sarah's placement on the kidney transplant list. So no, our divorce wasn't contentious. It was just sad. Because I was divorcing a stranger. The woman I'd loved had died long before Sarah did." The courtroom exploded. The judge had to call for order multiple times. And Thomas Brighton's lawyer realized too late that he'd just opened a door that destroyed any sympathy his client might have had. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood with tears in her eyes. In the case of the United States versus Thomas Brighton, on all 47 counts of wire fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement, we find the defendant guilty. Thomas Brighton showed emotion for the first time. He slumped in his chair, his face in his hands, and Maria felt absolutely nothing. No satisfaction. No triumph. Just exhaustion and the grim knowledge that guilty verdicts don't undo damage. Don't bring back the families who'd suffered. Don't restore Sarah's memory to what it should have been. Jennifer Cole's trial was even more devastating because of what it revealed about the depth of her betrayal. Her defense team had negotiated a plea deal, 5 years in prison in exchange for testimony against Thomas Brighton. But Ethan Cole had other plans. He'd hired a team of private investigators who'd spent months digging into Jennifer's life. And what they found changed everything. The prosecution entered new evidence on day 3 of Jennifer's sentencing hearing. Financial records showing that Jennifer had been embezzling from Ethan's personal accounts for 2 years before Sarah's death. That she'd opened credit cards in his name and racked up hundreds of thousands in debt he didn't know about. That she'd been planning to leave him regardless of whether Sarah lived or died. The foundation fraud wasn't about grief or mental illness or being manipulated by Thomas Brighton. It was just the latest scam in a long pattern of deception. But the evidence that destroyed Jennifer's plea deal was an email recovered from Rebecca Martinez's personal computer before she fled to Mexico. An email sent the night before Sarah's donor match fell through. Jennifer to Rebecca, "Do what we discussed. Redirect the kidney. Sarah's death will generate more long-term donations than her recovery. And Ethan will never suspect. He trusts you completely. It's necessary we put an end to Sarah's pain." Rebecca's response, "Are you sure? She's just a child." "Your child." Jennifer's reply, "She's already dying. We're just speeding up the inevitable. And making sure her death serves a purpose. Do it tonight." When the prosecutor read those emails aloud in court, the gasps from the gallery were audible. Maria watched Jennifer Cole's face crumble, watched her expensive lawyers huddle frantically, watched the plea deal disintegrate in real time. Because now it wasn't just fraud. It was conspiracy to commit murder. It was a mother plotting her own daughter's death for money. Ethan sat through it all with a face like stone. Maria held his hand so tightly her fingers went numb. And when the judge asked if he had a victim impact statement to make, Ethan stood and walked to the microphone with the slow deliberation of a man approaching his own execution. "Your Honor, members of the jury, everyone in this courtroom," he began, his voice raw but steady. "I loved Jennifer Cole for 20 years. She was my college sweetheart, my wife, my partner in building a life. We weathered struggles together. Celebrated victories together. And when Sarah was born, I thought my family was complete. I thought I knew what happiness was." He paused, his hands gripping the podium. "When Sarah got sick, I watched that happiness die. But I thought Jennifer and I were dying together. United in our grief. Fighting together to save our daughter. I worked 18-hour days trying to earn enough money to pay for experimental treatments. I made calls to every specialist in the world. I prayed prayers I didn't know I believed in. And through it all, Jennifer was there. Or so I thought." His voice broke. "The truth is she wasn't there. She was with Thomas. Planning a future that didn't include me or Sarah. Treating our dying daughter like a business opportunity. And when the chance came to let Sarah die so the foundation could capitalize on the sympathy," he stopped, unable to continue for a moment. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Sarah was 12 years old. She loved butterflies and terrible jokes. She wanted to be a veterinarian. She made me promise that even though she was dying, I'd help other kids who couldn't help themselves. She died holding my hand, and her last words were, "I love you, Daddy." Those were Sarah's last words. Do you know what my last words to her were? "I love you too, baby girl. You're going to be okay. I promise." But I was wrong. She wasn't going to be okay. Because the two people who were supposed to protect her most had already decided she was worth more dead than alive. And her legacy they also chose to destroy. Ethan looked directly at Jennifer for the first time since the trial began. "You didn't just steal money, Jennifer. You didn't just betray me. You did worse. And no plea deal, no expensive lawyer, no amount of pretending you were mentally ill or manipulated or a victim is going to change that truth. I hope you spend every day in prison thinking about Sarah. About the girl she was and the woman she'll never become. About the grandchildren we'll never have because you decided your greed was more important than her life." He stepped down, and Maria stood to wrap her arms around him as he collapsed into sobs that shook his entire body. The judge called a recess. When court reconvened, she ripped up the plea agreement. Jennifer Cole would stand trial for conspiracy to commit murder. And this time there would be no deals. The jury in Jennifer's trial deliberated for 14 hours. When they found her guilty on all counts, Jennifer screamed. Actual screaming. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. Thomas said it would work. Ethan, please. I loved her. I loved Sarah." But her words rang hollow in a courtroom that had heard the emails, seen the bank records, listened to testimony from Rebecca Martinez who'd been extradited from Mexico and decided to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. Judge Margaret looked at Jennifer Cole with unconcealed disgust when sentencing day arrived. "Mrs. Cole, I've presided over many trials in my career. I've seen evil in many forms. But I've never seen a mother plot her own child's death for financial gain. The prosecution has asked for life without parole. The defense has asked for mercy, citing your mental state and your own grief. I'm going to split the difference. I hereby sentence you to 50 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for 25 years. If you live long enough to be considered for release, you'll be an old woman who spent most of her life behind bars. That's more mercy than you showed your daughter." The gavel came down. Jennifer was led away screaming Ethan's name, begging for forgiveness he would never give. And Maria held this broken man she loved while he wept for everything he'd lost. His daughter, his marriage, his faith in the goodness of people he'd trusted. What would you have done in this situation if you are Ethan? How would you have reacted if you discovered your trusted friend was stealing from sick children? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us your own stories and don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button and turn on the notification. Also, do let us know in the comments if you're interested in what happened between Ethan and Maria. See you in the next one. Thanks for watching.